18 past the hour, and look who's here. Joining us now, former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Mr. Blair is now Quartet representative to the Middle East. Mark Halperin and Mike Barnicle are back at the table as well. It's good to have you guys, too.
Great to have you here. So, Palestine recognized by the UN, what does it mean?
It means that the Palestinians got very frustrated by the lack of a proper peace process, and so they've taken their case to the UN. The Israelis have now retaliated with a settlement announcement, and what we've got to do is try and put that behind us and get back to some form of credible negotiation, which is, I think, what I said the last time I was here and the time before, probably.
And the time before. And the Obama administration is saying that what the United Nations did unilaterally was a setback. Do you agree with that?
Well, the real point is that in the end, what delivers a Palestinian state is a negotiation, right? Now, the body I represent is split on the issue. Some people are in favor of the UN vote, some people are against it. But the truth of it, whether you're in favor or against it, is that the only thing that's going to work to deliver a Palestinian state, side by side with the secure state of Israel, is peace. And as you can see from what's happened in Gaza, what's happening in the diplomatic scene, we're a long way from that at the moment, but we have got a chance now. I mean, the president's been re-elected. I know he's deeply personally committed to this, and we've just got to regrip it, I'm afraid.
What's gone wrong over the past 6 months to a year? Why are we where we are today?
It's partly because there's so much turmoil in the region right now. This is making a huge difference to how each side views its own prospects.
So how would you characterize a credible negotiation, given the fact that as long as we've been alive, there's been these problems that keep erupting and never, ever, ever, ever get solved?
Well, it's interesting to note that occasionally we've come quite close, by the way. It's just important because otherwise people think, well, it's hopeless, so why bother? You've been trying for 30, 40 years.
Right.
I always point out to people, it was 50, 60 years of failed processes in Northern Ireland before we got one that worked. Right. Actually, back in the year 2000, again in 2008, the parties came quite close. So you got no option in the end. I mean, a one-state solution means, in the end, I think, a nightmare for both sides. So the only thing that works is to get back to a negotiation. I think what would make it credible, Michael, is if we've got to shape the negotiation.
The president does.
Well, I think the international community, and that means particularly obviously the US, give it some shape so that we can see, right, this is where it's going to go.
Dr. Brzezinski says that we can never just sit back and let the Israelis and the Palestinians do this by themselves, because we'll be waiting forever, that we have to come in as a strong, honest broker. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I do. And I think the other thing that's really important to realize is because of what's happening in Egypt right now, then you've got Syria. The region is in total turmoil. Israel's two biggest allies, Egypt and Turkey, have both changed their attitude towards Israel, obviously, in the past period. And for the Palestinians, you've got the division between the Gaza and West Bank. The only thing I would say is it remains hugely important, this dispute, though. I mean, I can't see a peaceful region long-term that's stable without the solution coming about. So even with everything that makes it difficult, you've got to go back and try.
How much of an influence / impact right now at this moment are the Israeli elections, with Bibi Netanyahu running for re-election in January?
Israel's a democracy. What happens in a democracy is when an election's going on, it's pretty dominant. So yes, it makes a big difference. But when I go back there for what I think will be about the 90th time since leaving office, what I expect to find are two sides that are pretty far apart from each other right now.
Thank you for your hard work there and for your optimism. Like our last several presidents, you're optimistic that this can be solved. It must be solved. But you've twice mentioned the instability in the region as being something that runs counter to the prospects of a negotiated settlement. Are we going to have instability now for a long time? People are now talking about Jordan coming into being unstable. Egypt looks like it's going to be unstable for a long time. So if instability is an enemy of a deal, don't we have to settle in now for a good long time?
That's possible, but actually there is another way of looking at it, which is that right now with this instability in the region, this is the time for the two sides to recognize it would be sensible to make progress and therefore give the politics of both sides a bit of insulation from what is otherwise a situation that is, it's hard to imagine what's going on in the Middle East right now. And remember, one of the things I will say to people about this is, remember, Egypt 50 years ago had a population of 30 million. Today it's 90 million, right? It's tripled its population. The average age of people in Gaza was 50% under the age of 18. So you've got a situation where you've got a young population all over that region. They've got to have jobs, they've got to have opportunity and hope for the future. This is not just about politics, it's also about the economy. And frankly, if you could take the Israeli-Palestinian thing to a better place, you would have then, I think, a better chance of not having that dispute then get caught up in the turmoil in the region, which I think there's every prospect if we don't move it forward. Can
you characterize now a credible negotiation as it pertains to the fiscal cliff? Like, what would it take, do you think, from your point of view?
Well, look, I'm an outsider here, but this is how it looks like to me, which is that inevitably everyone's going to beat up on each other very hard until everyone realizes, in fact, I mean, the country will expect a deal to be done. And so, you know, there's going to have to be a bit of give and take on both sides. I actually thought when I heard the positions today, even though everyone was saying, no, it's miles apart, you kind of see how they might.
You see the outlines.
Yeah, and by the way, for the rest of us on the outside, we need you to sort this. I mean, I would be more optimistic about the American economy right now than virtually any other part of the Western world, certainly. If you get this resolved, I think you'll move forward strongly. You've still got enormous strengths in America. You know, when we look at our situation in Europe now, you know, it's pretty troubling. But over here, I think once you resolve this, it'll, I think, trigger quite a strong growth pattern for you.
So let's go back to finding peace. How we find peace in the Middle East. I know there's a question that you've been asked many times and you've thought about repeatedly. How do we replicate the success that you talked about in Northern Ireland, where in the 1980s you had a situation so bad? Well, the 70s, of course, Bloody Sunday, which was just horrific. In the 1980s, you had the IRA trying to kill the British Prime Minister. In the 1990s, you had Gerry Adams talking about peace. And, you know, people in that region would no more believe that Gerry Adams and Ian Paisley would shake hands than they would believe that the leader of Hamas would go hug Netanyahu. How did it happen there, and how can it happen in the Middle East? What did you learn through that process that you had such a huge role in?
Three things. First, that you've got to give it shape. In other words, you don't just let them wander off, and you've got to try and shape.
So how did you do that with Gerry Adams and Ian Paisley?
Well, you have to go between the two of them until you can work out where a potential area of agreement is, and then you let that, you know, start to shape the negotiation. The second thing that is very important is you have to calm the violence. You can never negotiate if there's active violence going on, because people then, the bitterness is too deep. And the third thing, and the thing I learned most about actually, was you just don't give up, because you can't. So I know it sounds sort of easy to do, but we had, you know, once we even got the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, we then spent 10 years implementing. I mean, it was a nightmare every step of the way, but you just focused and focused down on it.
So it seems to me that there's not going to be, and listen, I mean, you look at my votes in Congress, I'm as pro-Israel as I should have a key to Tel Aviv on my wall in my office, but we're not going to have peace without Hamas being at the table. We're just not. You talk about what you can tell is going to happen. You may not be able to say this. As a strong supporter of Israel, I know if Hamas is not there, then you're going to have them killing whoever makes the deal. So how do you move them from where they are to how you move the IRA from where they were to?
The key was we managed to get an agreement that the violence stopped. Right. So in Ireland, in order to get people in the door of the negotiating room, the violence had to stop. So in my view, if you were able to do that, and they were prepared to be part of a negotiation for a two-state solution, then you might be in a different position. The trouble is, at the moment, it's very hard to say to the Israelis, negotiate with them in circumstances where they're firing rockets out of Gaza.
And still saying you don't have a right to exist.
Yeah. So, you know, would it be better if you had a Hamas at the table? Yes, but in order to have them at the table and anything other than a totally unrealistic...
What do they want? Other than the destruction? They know Israel's not going away.
Well,
what does Hamas want?
To be frank, you can't be sure. And the point about organization like Hamas is that, you know, it's probably part Palestinian nationalist, but it's part broader Muslim Brotherhood, and you know, what the agenda is, therefore, is sometimes hard to decipher. But the basic fact is, if you want to get people round the table, there's got to be at least an agreement that the violence stops.
Right.
You also mentioned one of the keys in Northern Ireland to negotiation success that might apply to Hamas. Jerry Murphy lived in a neighborhood in Belfast called Ballymurphy. The unemployment rate approached 90% in Ballymurphy. To go to the table, I think he knew instinctively that Northern Ireland did not need any more martyrs. They need more people employed.
Correct.
That was very effective.
It was very effective, but by the way, we could do this. And the Palestinian side, until recently, the West Bank economy was moving ahead. If we managed to get Gaza opening up, stop the weapons coming into Gaza, started to open up Gaza, you've got, for example, we're trying to develop at the moment you've got a gas field about 50 kilometers off the coast of Gaza that would make the Palestinians energy independent and would actually give them revenue for their authority and probably allow them to export some energy. So, you know, it's the thing that I find most frustrating sometimes is not that it's impossible to see the solution to this, but actually it is possible to see it.
Prime Minister Tony Blair, thank you very much. It's good to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
All the best to your wife.
Thank
when
you.
we come back, there are currently 80 living